The way people find craft beer has changed a lot the past 5 years. That's why we created Brewery DB, to help craft enthusiasts filter their search as they plan their next adventure. And to help breweries connect with these adventurers, we created Market My Brewery. Market My Brewery gives you full control over how people discover and see your products. You can market directly to the craft enthusiasts who are seeking great experiences without crowdsourced information or consumer ratings and reviews. We make it easy to update brand information, provide the key details people are searching for, and tell your brand story the way you want to tell it. Join Market My Brewery today for free and take control of your online presence.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to some people, I presume. Welcome to CBP Panel Fest. Hopefully everybody that's tuning in has had the opportunity to really take in some of the information that's being divulged over the last 2 days. Quick introduction. My name is TJ O'Neill. I'm with Whitfleys CPAs and advisors here in St. Louis, Missouri. Also go by the Thirsty CPA, so I'm sure I've seen tons of you at Craft Brewers Conference and some of the CBP events that come with. So very, very excited to moderate this panel today with a team of what I consider to be some of the best and brightest financial minds in the craft beer industry. So we'll go around real quick and just do some brief introductions, who you are, the brewery, the organization, where you're from. And let's make it fun. What's your favorite that you have on tap right now? If you're a brewery member, what's, in my case, and in Pat's case, what's our favorite beer that we've got going in the summer right now? So personally, we in St. Louis here is where I'm based out of. We've got Schlafly Bottle Works and Taproom here. Their raspberry Hefeweizen is an absolute staple for the St. Louis heat and humidity. So been drinking a ton of that, a great local beer. So without further ado, I'll kick it off. I'll just go clockwise around here. Dan's sitting to my right. So Dan, you want to do a brief intro?
Yeah, sure. Dan Herron, the VP of Finance at Creature Comforts Brewing Company. So sort of manage all the finance and accounting at the brewery. Been here about 9 years. Before that, I worked for about 10 years in San Diego at a large medical device company doing various accounting roles. Favorite beer right now is actually a new one we released this year, just aptly named Summer. It is a summer shandy. It's the first time we've really done a shandy. And it was by far the best one I've ever tasted, and is perfect for the summer heat here and sitting by the pool or the lake or anytime you're outside, basically.
I love it. Are you guys talking a little bit about maybe throwing some different flavor profiles in that shandy?
Not this year. So it's just part of a seasonal beer. We've got a spring, summer, fall, winter. That's the name of the beers. So we'll see how it is. It's been very successful. It's one of the top new beers in Georgia this year. Which is really where it's only been distributed. So really happy with it. But yeah, definitely potentially next year throwing some further flavors in. See if we want to go year round with it.
Yeah, very cool. Thanks, Dan. Glad you're able to join us. Jen, you want to go next for us?
Sure. My name is Jen Busch. I'm with Kona Brewing, Hawaii. So we are about coming up on 4 years of independence. We are Kona Brewing only in Hawaii. And so that has been an interesting journey. I've actually been with Kona off and on since 2006. I had a little hiatus there in the middle, but came back when we became independent. And really happy to be here. I think my favorite current beer is actually a collab beer that we just released with Kohola Brewery over in Lahaina. It's called La Lima, and it is a dragon fruit IPA. So not a lot of fruit flavor out of that, but an amazing color and just kind of a refreshing, I guess, a tartness that it adds.
Love it, La Lima. So I have to ask, do you is there an Independence Day celebration that the brewery has?
Not that we call Independence Day, but we have a number of celebrations around the brewery. But not a specific Independence Day.
Yeah, I bet there's a ton of celebrations. I mean, craft beer in Hawaii, I don't know that it gets I don't know that it gets much better than that. So
It's not hard to find an occasion.
no. If there is, you just create one. So awesome. Well, we appreciate you joining the panel. And now, Pat, obviously, last but not least, good seeing you, my brother.
Yeah, great to see you, TJ. We met at CBC in Vegas over a few months ago, which was awesome. I'm Pat McDonald. I'm the owner of The Beer Accountant. Started my own CPA firm, specializing in small business. Started with 2 breweries. Now we have up to 42. I see the ins and outs of breweries every single day. I'm at one of my favorite breweries right now. Favorite beer sipping on is, they're having a celebration. We're doing all 31 breweries in my county are doing a collaboration called Visit Bucks County. They're sponsoring a beer that gets put in cans, and it's amazing. So there's 31 breweries downstairs. They started a little bit earlier than I like to, but I'm not going to say no to be in front of these beautiful people. It's a juicy Pilsner, 6.0%. Love the aftertaste of this thing. They don't rush it. It takes about 6 to 8 weeks in the tanks. We're at Work Farm Brewing Company. Meeting a lot of new faces, seeing a lot of my clients, and just having a really good time. And very excited to talk numbers with you on this lovely Tuesday afternoon.
That's right. No, that's awesome. So tell me, we've got, you said 31 breweries down there, 32 breweries?
So Visit Bucks County is an organization that's partnered with all the hotel chains in the area, and they do collaborations throughout the year. One of their biggest collaborations is they're actually doing an IPA called Visit Bucks County. I think it's year 3 or something like that. And all the breweries will get together. We're in central Bucks County right now, about 20 minutes from my house. They will all take part in brewing this beer. And then in 4 weeks or 3 weeks from now, they'll each get a few sixtels or a few halves, and they'll put a few of it in cans. Visit Bucks County is going to buy all the cans and promote it. But every single brewery in Bucks County will have this available on draft in the next 2 to 3 weeks, all on the same weekend. So it brings people back into the little bit of a slower summer season locally, which is really, really exciting. And there's about 5 or 6 of my clients downstairs, which is great to see them. But every time this beer gets tapped, it never makes it through the weekend, which is very, very exciting.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, so I'm up in St. Louis, as I mentioned, in the Missouri Brewers Guild. We've got collab beers that come out quite frequently, and it's always one of the biggest events of the year is getting all the breweries together and really putting minds together. We've got our muck boots on and doing everything we need to do, and they come out with some really, really good beer. And always, I don't know if it's meant to be like this, but it's always super high ABV too. So it's great. Awesome, Pat. Like I said, good seeing you. Thanks for jumping on this panel. I think we have a really robust group of financial professionals on this call. We've got a couple of outsourced, and we've got a couple internally. So I think the conversation is going to be really good. So the title is aptly described: Lagers and Ledgers. So craft beer finance, right? Dan, you had mentioned prior to joining Creature Comforts, you were involved in the accounting side of a medical device company. Was there anything from that prior life that you took into the brewery finance piece as well? Was there any tips, tricks, anything that you see really applicable, even though it's a completely different industry? Anything applicable from that prior experience?
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest things that I did there probably, I worked in like revenue recognition, financial systems, things like that. What I think carried over the best though was the years I spent in cost accounting there. Really getting like that's something I found it's very hard to learn in an academic setting. Like I just feel like, I mean, as well as a lot of accounting is, but like cost accounting in particular was very difficult. So, I mean, we had manufacturing medical devices, manufacturing beer, like a lot of the accounting is still kind of the same. And so that was probably the biggest piece of it. We don't do like a full cost accounting here. We're including like labor and overhead into our standard costs. We do have a general idea of what our standard labor and overhead cost is per barrel. We use that for the appropriate GAAP requirements required by the bank and end of year taxes, stuff like that. So that's probably the biggest thing that I gained from my prior experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of odd to think that cost accounting is really heavily in the medical device sales industry. It's obviously the heartbeat of craft brewing because we're trying to break this down on the most micro level possible. And when we're looking at profitability and margin analysis, cost accounting goes a long, long way. And to your point, I think as accountants, I'll speak for myself. Cost accounting is probably the one class that I snoozed through the most. But in what I do now, it's probably the most applicable. I think, Pat, you'd probably agree with that from an outsource side, right? If you're working through profitability and some of these other metrics with your clients, how does cost accounting play into those conversations?
No, 1,000% with my clients. What we always focus on is, listen, I'm not really good at sales, so I can't really grow top line revenue, but there's two ways to make money, right? You either grow sales or you decrease costs. So the first thing we always look at is the cost of goods sold. Okay, well, from what I'm looking at, you're paying too much for hops or too much for cans. Why don't you try this? Why don't you try to buy cans off of somebody that had to put a bulk order in? So your cost of goods sold is one of your main pillars, and then the next big pillar is either your rent or what you're paying for your employees. And a lot of times your front of house employees are getting tipped out, so they don't really mind the low hourly wage. But if you can find a way to save on margins, once a year I have my clients go through their we call it a vendor summary detail. We go through, figure out what they spent on every single vendor, and see if there's two competitors for each one of those things that they're supplying, whether it's cans, lids, oxygen, call them up. I was able to save a client $60,000 just by calling and arguing the price down. Hey, we spent X amount of dollars. Can you give us a deal? They didn't have to switch a single vendor over. They just got two quotes from different competitors. We were able to see that information in real time. And, they're doing the same exact thing, probably going to produce more beer at a lower cost, which is, fantastic news. And it's a practice I recommend for everybody. Keep track of the people that you're paying because, these certain vendors are going to start relying on you. And if you're going to do bigger quantities and keep growing, there's price breaks.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always good to reevaluate those relationships, right? You talked on the surface, it really is about driving revenue or reducing costs. And I think, Jen, you're in a very unique position and quite literally on an island where when we think about Hawaii from a cost perspective, just the matter of getting what you need where you need it, that's hugely important. What kind of strategies do you put in place in terms of cost reduction and making sure that you're doing everything you can within your bandwidth to ensure that you're getting appropriate pricing?
Yeah, we spend a lot of time with our supply chain folks, just trying to make sure, as Pat mentioned, looking at other vendors, at least on an annual basis. For us, the freight ends up being a big negotiation because it is so significant for us. Really, everything that we have out here, there's a freight component to it. And so we spend a lot of time looking at that, looking at the trends over time, going back and just making sure that the freight charges are right. We find a lot of times we will get overcharged. There's a lot of churn with a lot of documents. And so just going through and just closing that gap and just checking each one. Was this accurate? Was this our ship? No, that helps. That's something we have to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think another.
Please, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, you're okay.
I was just going to say, another, I think something that has given us an opportunity to really look at our cost structure was that we took on contract brewing for a brewery in Lahaina that had lost their facility. We had purchased contract brewed beer before, but what was really great to see was to get all of us together in a room and say what worked and what didn't work when we were purchasing contract beer, and how would we do it in this situation very quickly, figure out what's the cost on that and how are we going to make it happen. And so I think having a good understanding of all of our costs going into that we were able to turn that around very quickly, come up with a price that, was accurate and fair, and kind of continuing to refine that model. But it gave us a different way to look at our expenses.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned contract brewing, and I think that's a trend that we're seeing a ton of in the industry right now, especially, obviously we look at capacity first. What are some, and this is back to you, Jen, what are some of maybe the steps or the analyses that you put together in determining your contract brewing relationships, and whether or not you'll take in a contract beer or even contract out potentially?
Yeah, so I mean, with us, we never intended to contract brew. One of our kind of unusual circumstances, a good problem to have is that when we became independent, we had a new brewery to bring online. And I think it's interesting to bring a facility online that you didn't design and you didn't build. And so figuring out how that works for our organization versus the previous organization was, it has been an ongoing struggle, I would say, challenge. And so for us, it was, we need to do this. We need to be part of this community and help Kohola out. And so we really had an attitude, we're going to figure this out. As we worked through that, it actually has worked very well. And so we have considered, perhaps doing contract brew for some other breweries in Hawaii. Capacity is tough to build here in Hawaii. And so really just trying to figure out how much capacity do we have that we can allocate to contract, and how does contract brewing fit into our strategy as we grow?
Absolutely. And talking about capacity, what sort of information are you pulling? Are you pulling data from your inventory and production management systems? Is it more ERP driven? Is it kind of just a gut feeling?
For us, we really have two constraints. Space is a constraint for us, storage space. So, the complexity, we have 71 packages coming out of this brewery. So the storage space for the wraps, the cans, it's is a lot. And so we just have to make sure we don't take on too many brands, that we don't make the brewery too complicated, for our people. I think our other constraint is people. It's better now, but definitely coming back from the pandemic, we lost a lot of our workforce during the pandemic. A lot of hourly workers left Hawaii because they couldn't afford to live here without employment. And so really we are trying to just get enough staff to get us, we have run room on our capacity in the brewery, but we don't have enough staff. And so we're trying to build our staff over time and really ramp up that production, and not just go from where we are today to the theoretical capacity of the brewery. And so just really keeping the brakes on has been a challenge, to just let's not go too fast. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's not make promises we can't fulfill. So that's been a lot of our analysis.
Yeah, absolutely. Not making sure we're not biting off more than we can chew. And Dan's been with Creature for 9 years. So you just recently, not too terribly recently, brought on another brewery out in LA, right? LA County, Dan?
Yeah, downtown LA. We opened up another brewery out in downtown LA. Yeah.
So
go ahead.
I was going to say, financially, obviously, there's a lot that goes into that decision, especially being based in Georgia. Now you're moving halfway across the country to open up another brewery. What, from a financial perspective, what kind of conversations were you having internally? What metrics, data were you looking at internally, or calculations you and the rest of the team are rolling through to say, okay, this is feasible, this is potentially profitable, it's sustainable? What did that look like?
Yeah, so the first thing we started with was just looking at our own tap room here, and really seeing how that would operate as its own sort of independent business, and really setting up our financials. So we have the original facility downtown Athens, then we opened up a large production facility about a mile away. We started basically internally selling beer from one to the other to sort of get an understanding of where the sort of cost would be if for that brewery, but really just kind of built out a P&L for the next 5 years, based on sort of what we had with our initial brewery, using those sort of growth trends, being pretty conservative as possible, really going out, sourcing all the equipment, and then it's like the LA brewery, while it's a Creature Comforts brewery, it's technically a different business entity. So there was a different group of investors that brought money to the table for that sort of investment. There was some shared ownership. It's very complicated, but that was, we had been looking at location for different breweries for a long time, looking at sort of just demographics, where the industry was growing and stuff. And so, a lot of it just kind of fell in our laps. There were some, people from LA filming movies in Atlanta, loved our beer, had a space already, and we got into talking with them, and then really just kind of put the pedal down and got everything moving on that. Very difficult opening a brewery in LA, though. A lot of paperwork, a lot of permits to get. But yeah, I mean, we for the most part, we just kind of looked at, we just built out exactly how we would, like, if it was a startup business, because we're not brewing beer in Atlanta and shipping it out to LA. So it's basically its own business. We looked at it just as we would any other startup business. Are we going to have, how much beer do we have to sell, in order to break even? And year one, knowing we're probably not going to make money year one. Hopefully we break even, and then sort of build out the next few years, so we're kind of see where we get to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure the cost accounting piece that you talked about helped a ton with that, especially on the break-even side, which I think the break-even analysis is one of the most underutilized tools in the industry. Pat, I'm sure you've helped breweries bring a second brewery online, or even startup breweries. How important is a break-even analysis, or some of these other calculations in looking at feasibility and sustainability?
Yeah, I actually want to touch back on one thing Dan said, which like hammer home. If you're going to do a second location, or just have like a production location, the fact that they were charging the one location for their beer is one of the smartest things you can do, because you want to almost treat it as two separate entities. Not everybody does it that way, but if you're able to kind of separate the two different entities and be like, okay, for the production facility to at least break even, how much would we have to charge the tap house 1 or tap house 2 for those beers if we didn't do any self-distribution, if we were just trying to supply our 1 to 2 different tap houses? That's a great way to look at making sure because then if you're able to self-distribute or potentially sign on with a distributor, that's a kind of a break-even point for, hey, this is what we need to charge for a sixtel, for a case, for a half barrel type of situation. And again, everybody's in this business to make money, but you need to know your costs all in. So your break-even analysis, you can do the best projections. A lot of bank loans are based on projections, especially if it's a new unproven concept. But you want to take those projections and almost do a kind of a worst case scenario. Okay, worst case scenario, can we survive and at least break even? So that's where everything kind of starts with a lot of my clients, is if they're trying to either open a second location or open their first location. And then we just break it down by, okay, we got to sell X amount of pints. Okay, if we don't do pints, what if we do, beers to go? What if we do 12 ounce, 6-pack of 12 ounce cans? All those are different variations of what you're selling, but you need to know your overall costs. And what I like to do with the break-even analysis is kind of divide it between variable and fixed. Your rent's not going to change. More likely than not, your workforce isn't going to change. It's going to be a 40-hour, work day for the people that are, kind of working for you. Your lid price, your pack tech price, or like your label price isn't necessarily going to change. And then, variable pricing as far as how many hops we're going to go through, how many different malts we're going to go through, depending on what you're trying to brew. And the biggest factor is, what beer are we brewing? How long is it going to take? 2 weeks compared to 4 weeks compared to 6 or 8 weeks, huge opportunity cost. So you have to factor that as well into your break-even analysis, and just break it down in layman's terms of like, okay, if we're going to make this work, we got to sell, 3,000 pints in a week, and then we can at least even 3,500 pints if we sell that 500, is more profit. 4,000, then we're really in the green type of situation. So not only figuring out your overall cost, but breaking that down into what you are actually selling is one of the harder hurdles to get over, but very, very important for these small business owners.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Data integrity is so important in the industry. When we're looking at, to Dan's point and your point about we've got these separate business components, really treating them as separate business components it's mandatory. I mean, that's something that we harp on all the time, because if you don't, you start muddying the waters with the data that you have, right? We're running reports. They're all probably telling you, we all integrate our systems, whether it's our point of sale, our ERP, what have you. And so being able to pull out individualized data from that is tough if we're not separating our business components as separate businesses, because you can't make one decision for the greater good if you don't understand how something is driving one particular location versus another particular location. And while they're both, again, it's the same organization, it's the same, we'll call it within the ecosystem of the business, they are their own separate components, and treating them as such it's mandatory. We have to protect that data integrity, because that's what's going to be driving management decisions. And once we can't manipulate that data if we're pulling in incorrect snapshots. So I completely agree.
Yeah, I would say it also creates a lot of extra work on the accounting side. You've got to eliminate, all the revenue and COGS, all that profit elimination needs to take place, so you're not double counting revenue. I think it's well worth it. You also have to build up systems with your warehouse team to make sure things are getting transferred correctly at the correct costs and everything. So, and make sure you're selling it as opposed to just transferring at cost of goods. So I'm sure every software probably handles it differently, but that's one thing to look out for, is that it does create a lot of extra work. I do think it's well worth it, though.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Dan. It is extra work. It is worth it. In terms of Jen had mentioned the people aspect of the industry. I think one thing Pat and I would say that from a CPA perspective, the pipeline is very short on CPAs. Just accounting professionals in general. On the the internal brewery side, obviously there's only so much that you can do in building out a finance team. How have you leveraged other professionals, whether it's somebody like myself or Pat on the CPA side, or maybe there are individuals internally that are wearing different hats? They help out with the finance, but to Dan's point, maybe they're a production manager, so they're very in tune with the costing. Dan, what are you doing within Creature Comforts to kind of help alleviate some of that the time investment on the accounting side?
Not as much as I probably like. I would say when we first opened, we had, so my brother was one of the founders and CEO. He worked for some much larger beverage companies, was very, as in finance and pricing and stuff like that. So I had a lot of support from him when I first started. And we slowly started bringing in more and more people for some of the easier functions, like less technically accounting, like more AP, AR. We've leveraged our audit firm a lot, Whitley, to help with some of the more technical accounting issues, and really just kind of there's some good craft accounting groups that I'm a part of that you can sort of solicit advice from. I would say we've spent a lot of time, particularly the last few years, as the business has really started to grow, and really training and especially like any sort of manager level to understand what a P&L is, know how to read a P&L, and a lot of education around just what EBITDA is and what it means. So yeah, that's probably it. We haven't used a whole lot of the production team and stuff, or we've got, we're building up a supply chain department now that has helped out tremendously with purchasing and procurement and really driving the cogs down.
Yeah, absolutely. Jen, how would you speak to your experience in this same topic?
Definitely, something that Dan mentioned that we've been really working to is to educate everyone on what EBITDA means. Why do we want it? Why is it good? And how can they drive it? So we implemented a gain share program for our brewery staff, our kind of non-management brewery staff, where they have KPIs that we track, and that we have a electronic board up in the brewery that kind of lists how they're running for the day, and really that ties in a financial result to their day-to-day work. How can they have a positive effect on that and then be rewarded for that? So that's been a big focus. I think for us, the partnership between supply chain and finance has been huge, and we've worked a lot to build that and to really understand how we can support each other. So we've been very fortunate. We have a very strong supply chain team, and actually our new president came from the supply chain side. So she's very supportive of all supply chain and finance working together as a team.
I love that.
We've done something similar actually with KPIs the last couple of years. A lot of it is also, it's performance. It drives the, bonus payout at the end of the year, whether or not you reach your KPIs or not. So tying that, and a lot of that is a function of EBITDA too. We're paying out a bonus as a percent of EBITDA. It's simplifying it, but that's been a big piece, and really having each department and managers owning sections of the P&L. And in particular, just individual GL accounts. So look, here's your budget. Here's your spending year to date. I need to know, are you're on plan? Great. Are you going to end up a year on plan? Are you going to be over plan? Are you going to be under plan? And that really helps us drive sort of a forecast for the rest of the year. And just everybody taking that, it's available for everybody. So there's a little bit of added pressure on each person in there, right? Because everybody's seeing how you're performing against your budget. But it does drive that sort of accountability. And also just gives everybody a better holistic view of, how the company is doing as a whole.
Absolutely. I love that. The idea of a scoreboard. It comes up all the time when I'm talking about leadership or management or on production. If you don't know the score, what are you playing for? Right. And that was never fun as kids. You never, you play basketball. I never played basketball. I'm 5'6". Other sports, you play other sports. And you'd say, as kids, oh, we're not keeping score. Well, what's the fun in that? Pat and I are rugby guys, so we have to have a scoreboard. We're too competitive to not have a scoreboard. So I really love that idea, and I've talked to a lot of breweries recently that have explored that, and whether it's an actual visual dashboard in the tap room or in the production facility, or if it's just something that they do post shift. It really is important to know what's driving success. And so Dan and Jen, you both talked about some of the KPIs that were, financial transparency, I think, is huge in the industry. We're talking about these KPIs that we're coaching our staff on. What are some of those key performance indicators that you're really trying to educate on, that you're showing are key to business and profitability, success, and honestly, the overall financial betterment of the employees themselves? Jen, you want to take that one? Sorry, I
Sure.
You guys there.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think we have a couple in the, as far as brewing, definitely looking at our beer loss. We have learned a lot about the equipment in the brewery and how to minimize that loss. So that's been a huge focus. And we track it, the clarification loss, and then of course, the kegging and the canning loss. We also track brew house efficiency. We track destroyed beer. And then something that might be unusual for us is we also are tracking our, barrels of water per barrel of beer, kind of a lot of our sustainability objectives, tracking those on a fairly real-time basis. Just being in Hawaii, water is a precious resource. I mean, it is everywhere, but we do have a limit on the water we can use. And so just trying to tie in what management cares about to their day-to-day, day-to-day work.
Love that. Dan, how about you guys?
Yeah, we do a lot of the same ones. There's a lot of KPIs. Pretty much every team has quite a few of them. So I'm not familiar with all of them. But I would say, on the production side, total efficiency, really looking at destroyed inventory, whether it be beer in process that needs to be dumped, or like obsolete can inventory, or just destruction of cans because, big pallets get destroyed, dust gets into them or something like that. Also just beer that didn't get sold, or, it coded out date wise because it was stuck in the back of the cooler. It wasn't properly FIFO'd. We do similar things for sustainability, watching the water usage, kilowatt per hours for, per barrel. The biggest ones I think for me that are helping me on like the finance side is days inventory on hand. Just, keeping track of that monthly and setting a target for that. And like, look, this needs to be, we need to keep this amount of days inventory hand, as well as like just the total inventory number, just like, hey, this is a number, really don't need to be going over that. And then tracking with everybody, I think like the CapEx spending every year, and really trying to set a limit on how much CapEx spend we can do. Part of the teaching about the EBITDA is that people realize, if it's CapEx, it doesn't affect EBITDA, but it still affects cash. And there's only so much cash that can go around. I don't think they're necessarily trying to game the system, but they're thinking like, well, it doesn't show up in my reporting. I have KPIs that are related around like our cash flow, cash balance, and how much CapEx we're going to be spending every year.
Yeah, absolutely. And Pat, you're in the same boat. You've got, though, a different set of goggles on. You're coming in externally into an internal operation, and you're saying, here's what we need to be worried about. When we're talking about KPIs, whether it's more related to sustainability or efficiency or profitability, what are some of the ones that, say you come into a brewery owner that just is, at their wits' end, Pat, I need help. What are some of the just top 3 KPIs that I really need to understand, and I also need to communicate to my staff?
Yeah. So what we've been coming into recently is how do they retain their staff without necessarily paying them, a higher wage, right? Because a lot of times the front of house is making a lot of money because they're based on tips. The owner's only making X amount of dollars, whether they're salary or whether they're hourly. They have people they can't lose. They essentially have, key employees that they can't lose. Hey, we can implement a very similar, bonus system based on KPIs or based on percentages. And then we can actually tell them, hey, your bonus is based upon either growth of revenue, quarter over quarter, month over month. When you start to get a little bit more mature, we switch from the actual, growth model to a margin model. Because it's like, hey, if you're making the same amount, but it's costing us 20% less, you're going to get X amount of dollars as a quarterly bonus. So bringing that to the production side, then they'll come up with ideas. Oh, I saw so-and-so, get X amount of pallets. Maybe we can go in on an order from them. They're using this company. They're joining brewery alliances just to try to cut costs down from that perspective. Because the clients that I tend to work with, don't have as big of a workforce. So it's, a lot of hands, in many different plates and pots. But everybody's motivated by money, and cash flow is obviously a big thing as well. Not to pivot away from your question, but with the whole CapEx thing that Dan brought up, I make all the owners do a wish list in the beginning of the year. Hey, 2020, I usually do it at the beginning of 2024 or 2025. What are we trying to buy for the brewery this year? Because on the books we can afford it, but how much is that going to cost us? Right. So what do we really need? And I make them all do it independently. So all the owners will do it independently. They'll give me their results and then be like, okay. And then I'll rank them. Like I'll have to rank them like okay, this got 3 first place votes. This got 1 first place vote. So then we can be like, hey, for the record, all 4, 5, 6 of you want these 5 things. If we continue to go the way we're doing, we can afford these 4 things this year. Can these 2 other things wait? Right. And it's like, you know what, we can. And make sure we have enough money in the reserves in case something breaks. I'm not talking like normal wear and tear. I'm talking like, okay, expansion, or we need to redo the deck, or, we're putting a new roof on type of situation. Those kind of capital expenditures of where you are. Having just those conversations with the managers and the owners so they know that something like that's coming, I think is very, very important. It's not necessarily set in stone, but it gives people a goal to work towards. So figuring out your wish list, as well as, hey, we're going to compensate our staff with, quarterly bonuses based upon different metrics, whether it's revenue growth or, gross profit growth, or if they hit a certain number of waste. A lot of stuff in the tanks that they're using, instead of, if it's a 15 barrel tank, they're only getting 13 and a half. Like, okay, why don't we try to get 14? Why don't we try to get 14.2, as an average for that whole year, for that quarter, for those 6 months? If you're able to get more yield in the same amount of time, that's obviously going to lead to bigger profits. So those types of metrics is what the smaller guys that I'm used to working with kind of look at and can control, and also motivate their workforce.
Yeah, I love that. And that's it. It's so important. You talked a little bit about employee input, right? One of the things that I tell our staff all the time is good ideas come from everywhere, because we look at things differently as we progress through the industry. What is important to us as professionals now might not have been evident when we were first starting out, and vice versa. And so anytime we go on brewery tours, and I'll take a staff or an intern on a ride along, which they're always the first ones to volunteer. It's like, oh no, I'll go to a brewery. It's just amazing what they see, what they pick up on that other people might not. Like for instance, there was one brewery that we had visited. This was quite a few years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. A brewery that we visited that I took an intern, or two of our summer interns with us, and we're out there and we're doing a brewery tour, and we're walking through the back, and there was a stat. They were talking about they had a pretty big inventory loss on bags. I think it was small bags of malt that were on the floor. They had a flood. So all this malt was essentially wasted. So we're going through this brewery tour. At the end of it, we're driving back to the office, and they said, well, what did you pick up on? And, without any experience whatsoever, they're rattling off all kinds of great stuff. And one of the interns said, well, they said that they had this massive inventory loss because they didn't have malt bags on pallets or jacks or whatever, right? And I said, yeah. And they said, we were walking through there, and they still didn't have, there were a bunch of bags back there of materials that still weren't on. They weren't raised off the ground. It's like, oh, I didn't even think about it. I'm worried about the canning line and everything else. And it's just stuff that they pick up on. Jen, on that same point, do you have any, and this is a little bit off of maybe the financial, but it ties into the financial, the KPI and the cash flow and everything else with overall efficiency. What kind of formal or informal avenues do you have for employee feedback on how can Kona be better?
Mm-hmm. So this is something we've been working on quite a bit. So we have, most of our employees are here in Kona, but we do have a restaurant on Oahu and Honolulu. And so we really are trying to make sure that we keep those employees in the loop, and that all of our employees are hearing the same message. So we have what we call our talk story, which is kind of a Hawaiian slang for just catching up and just kind of a casual conversation. So we will go to each location 3 times a year and basically just have kind of a short presentation where they get to talk, they get to hear from each of the members of the senior leadership team and what that person's working on. And then at the end, we have a lot of questions. And, they can ask anything, like, let's talk about, and we've gotten some really great ideas and some great feedback out of that. And I think just made sure that anything that is a key topic that we are telling the employees so that they know about it and they don't hear about it from outside the company and say, hey, wait a minute, I worked there and I didn't even know about that. So I think that has been a lot. That's been a big help. We also do an annual employee survey that we actually just did. So we're looking forward to getting the results of that. And I think in that some people feel safer. It's we have a group outside of the company that compiles the results. So people feel safer to just give us that feedback, and there's some hard feedback in there sometimes. I know last year we had a pretty difficult meeting, right? When we first looked through those results, but once you get through that emotional reaction to the results, then working through and saying, okay, how can we address this? And then in the next talk story, we give a summary of, these were kind of the key things that came out in that employee survey. And let's talk about these. And so that's one. And I think also just having transparency with the managers. We have a monthly meeting where we go through the financials. As a group, we have kind of breakout meetings with each of the our two pubs and the brewery group to really go through in extreme detail their financials and really just ask the questions and make sure that they're understanding their results and how they can affect those results. And I think having it in both a big group, like a employee meeting is one, you get one response, but then when you break it down and you're talking to just the pub managers, I think they feel safer asking more questions. And then when we have our quarter end, when it's time to pay bonuses, I set up a couple of meetings at different times of the day. And it's, hey, this is, I'm going to go through in detail the bonus calcs. This is not a required meeting. If you don't want to hear the numbers, you don't have to come. If you want to hear it, I'm happy to talk about it and to educate. And it's funny, we had our last quarter wasn't great. So it was the first time that we had really missed our company-wide objectives. And I got a lot more response, a lot more people saying, hey, what happened? And I think paying more attention to what is driving their bonus calculation. So I think those are kind of the main ways that we've tried to reach out to the employees.
Yeah, I love that. I love the terminology "talk story" too. I think I'm gonna start using that here in the Midwest.
Yeah, I'm using that 100%.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Let's have a talk story.
It's so true. No, and it's so important, and really one of the overarching themes of this entire panel has been on financial literacy and really educating our teams on what makes us, what makes our brewery or our organization successful. So Dan, kind of the same question. What kind of avenues do you have for employees to provide feedback, whether it's, a survey or, on the production side, what can we be better at? What do we do really well? How do we scale this so that we can hit some of these KPIs that we talked about, which ultimately financially affect the employees?
Yeah, I think we do a lot of the same things Kona does. We do an annual employee engagement survey. It's 80, 90 questions or so. Generally, a lot of it's just around like the culture of the brewery, how you feel, things like that. It's all anonymous. We have a third party that compiles all the information for us. And then it also compiles it sort of by department. So each manager can sort of look at their team individually. It's not quite anonymous when you don't have like one or two people on your team, but still drives some good conversation. Another big thing I think we have quarterly town halls. So generally our CEO gets up, gives a little presentation, but a lot of it is just a lot of sales performance, and then we always have some sort of stories from other people, just celebrating some big wins that they've made with their KPIs and things like that. So I think some of that really helps, and recognizing when people are hitting those KPIs. Really sort of celebrating that. That goes a long way, I think, with a lot of employees. Is just just a nice pat on the back. Some sort of whimsical kind of awards, things like that, go a long way. Much in addition to sort of monetary compensation.
Yeah, Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm a CPA on the tax side, but there's nothing that gets me more energized than hearing some of the success stories that we have as a firm, or my teams, or our market, or what have you. And so, really being transparent and all that. We talked a little bit about the financial transparency, but operational transparency, just what's going on. To Jen's point, you don't want to hear this from somebody down the road say, "Well, I didn't know this, and I work at the brewery." It's kind of the equivalent of being a baseball player and finding out you getting traded because you're watching ESPN. It's just, I think it leaves a bad taste in their mouth. So transparency is key, and really just listening. And I know Andrew's a massive advocate of listening to customers. Pat, from your end, again, we have a completely different perspective. We're outside coming in. What are some of the suggestions that you feel like you've been recommending to your clients in terms of really getting ideas going and being, because I think small business owners are a lot more guarded from a financial aspect. They don't want to lay all their cards on the table. What are some of the ways, tips, tricks that you're kind of helping them along the process and saying like, hey, it's okay to be vulnerable, but we want to show authenticity and really put a program in place that show people, again, the scoreboard, for lack of a better term.
Yeah. So like a lot of times, we start off as a CPA or financial advisor. Once we get their actual information and we have access to like their bank account, they start to trust us a lot more and then start telling us a lot of stuff that doesn't necessarily have to do with accounting. Sometimes I'm putting on, if it's a husband and wife, or if it's, two business partners that have been in business for like 20 years, like I'm kind of a therapist in a situation. Like, hey, we're just here to talk about the financials. They start bringing a bunch of stuff that I'm not qualified to talk about, but I'm just here, like I'm in the room, like, okay, can we get back and focus? But I think those tough conversations open up a lot more doors. And from what we can see the trends. Hey, what's working, what's not working? And like, depending on your size, I tell my clients to throw as much as they can against the wall. Hey, this worked for a client over here. Why don't you try this? And especially if like you're kind of lean and mean and small, you can try it and it's not too much, not too much of a cost. I think once they let their guard down and they realize that, hey, if they succeed, they open a second or a third or a fourth location, like I'm all about that, right? Like then my firm succeeds, right? Then I can hire more employees and everything like that. So it's just kind of getting that initial guard down. And from what we do, TJ, like it's hard to get in the door. We're in the door. They earn our trust. And it's like, hey, I can help you in other ways. I got a lawyer. I got an insurance guy. I got this guy. I got that person. Oh, you're trying to do that? Guess what? Two of my other clients are also trying to do that. Why don't you go in on like a bulk purchase? And this way here, all your margins go down. So it kind of goes to more relationship building and figuring out what their overall needs are, not just from an accounting perspective, and then just being open with you. I'm a very, very open, honest person. I'm drinking beer on camera right now, right? Okay, cool, whatever. It's my Tuesday. This is what I do. Sorry, not sorry. But it's one of those breaking that barrier down, especially, with the small business owners. They're wearing 17 hats. They don't trust anybody. They're very bullheaded, more likely than not. They want to be completely in control. So once you relinquish a little bit of that control and you can see like my Instagram sucks. I'm paying somebody to do my Instagram and I know that. Like I paid somebody for this logo. Like I get it. I can't do all this stuff. And no matter which size of your business, the business owner can't do everything that they want to do. So let them concentrate on what they can do and let you flourish and what you can provide for them. Creates a great partnership. And then all of a sudden they're asking for crazy advice. Like, hey, do you know where I can get my dog washed? Like, nope, don't have any of those clients, but like I have a hose, right? So it's just building that relationship and just being there for your client. And I think the biggest thing in our situation, TJ, is like, it's okay to say no. I don't have all the answers. Like I'm going to stick in my lane, but I know so-and-so is also going through this. Why don't you reach out to them? I mean, craft beer is a very small knit community and it's amazing and it's awesome, especially once you're in it. So just using that community, because more likely than not, if there are struggles, you're not the only one going through them. So having some type of sounding board or just asking like, hey, are everybody's sales down 10% because it's the summer and nobody vacations here? And it's like, actually, yeah, some of them are down 15, 20, unfortunately, but it's because you're not in an area that people vacation. Like we're going to get through that. Football season's coming up. Go Birds. Like we're going to be fine, right? Let's just get through August. So like it's having those conversations where even though we didn't go over any metrics or anything like that, it's just everybody's kind of in the same boat in that situation. And it just makes you feel better about your situation without having to, look at everybody's single financials type of thing.
Yeah.
That's what I think we kind of bring in that situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And you nailed it on the head. Craft brewing, and it's one of the reasons, obviously I love beer, but one of the reasons I really love the industry is because it is so relationship based. It is so tight knit. Everybody, you're not just going to come in here and take it by storm. Like, you really have to build people's trust, and it takes time. But once you're in, and you can be vulnerable and you can ask people for help. And that was the first thing that I really found in this industry, was the amount of collaboration and the amount of questions and answers, right? We're all, I say we're not breweries, but it's all a competition. You're all in the same market, but it's so much more than that. It really is about the greater good of the community. So we've got a couple minutes left. I think we've got maybe one more prompt that we can talk about. We've harped on a little bit. Cash is king. Dan talked about it. People try and get around EBITDA and saying, "Oh, I'm going to throw something into CapEx," but it's like, hey, it's still, regardless of what EBITDA is, if we don't have the cash to do something, that's really what's controlling the conversation here. For Dan and Jen and Pat, what is one thing that you do now or you wish you did when you were first starting off in terms of cash flow, best practices, tips, tricks? Because again, cash is king. What's something that if you were going to give just a piece of advice to another brewery professional, accounting professional on cash flow management, what is it? Dan, we'll go clockwise, or we'll go ladies first because we went clockwise first. So we'll go Jen.
Okay. I think one thing for us that's been key is not just looking at CapEx, but sequencing that CapEx. We have 3 facilities that are in need of a lot of capital spend. And so one thing we've spent a lot of time with our engineer is, look, we know we need to replace the keg line, but what's the right order to do? We want additional functionality from the can line. We need to move this. And so that's one thing we're really trying to drill in on, that CapEx spend, and if at all possible, group projects together. A lot of times we have to bring a welder from the mainland. What's all the welding that we need to do? And so we do end up having really some very robust conversations in the CapEx meeting of what's the right way to schedule it out, and then tying that into the cash flow forecast. Okay, we know that the remodel on the Kona pub will be done at this time, and that's when that pub comes online. We don't want to start another big project until that happens, and just making sure that we're not going to get in a position where we're, halfway through 3 CapEx projects and they all have the same constraint, or we run our cash balance down so much because of those CapEx projects. That's been a lot of our focus.
Absolutely. Yeah. The sequencing is huge. I love the example about the welder, right? And just making sure that we're being as lean as possible. No, that's fantastic. Dan, how about you guys?
Yeah, I mean, I could probably do a full podcast on cash flow. Look, I mean, small, for small business, it's extremely important. I mean, I know Pat earlier mentioned about buying it and getting price breaks, but there are times, I think, especially as a small business, where you've got to manage cash flow appropriately. You can't, if you're at risk of making payroll, you can't pay people in cans and cartons, right? You've really got to watch it in the beginning. As you mature as a business and you have access to debt through a bank, I would generally when we've got some large projects coming up, we'll get a CapEx line from a bank that may be open for a couple of years before it turns out. And really sort of managing that. We honestly look at cash flow basically every month. We sort of manage it out. We look at where we are, where we think we're going to hit our EBITDA. After that, we discount certain things, rent, now that we've got the ASCA 42, not having rent hit for the most part, hop payments, debt, interest, things like that would fall, taxes, bonuses, stuff like that would kind of fall out of your EBITDA performance. I think I sort of lost my train of thought there for a second. Sorry. But we really just, sort of keep that on a monthly basis and sort of, yeah, I agree. It's like, looking at all the CapEx projects. So really sitting down with the production team. We generally will do our plan for the next year. Like, all right, well, this is the volumes we're going to hit. What equipment do you need to hit this? And sort of, and prioritizing things and really coming back and, getting in quotes and how can we value engineer this to get some savings in it. And then just really sort of timing up your cash flow. I would say too, if you've reached a point where you can't negotiate price anymore with an equipment supplier, you can often negotiate terms, and you may be able to push out terms of payment back quite a bit as well. Sort of like, a few months after it's operational. So that's always a good option. So then at least you're starting to generate cash with your new equipment, and you're able to use that to pay it off later.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. All great tips. Pat, you want to round it out here?
I'm going to talk about the actual cash. When you're paying your front of house employees, and in this area it's 85, 90%, tips in credit card, don't dip into your cash to pay them out. Payroll is very cheap to do. Don't do 2 weekly payroll, do weekly payroll, and make sure they have the tips coming out of actual direct deposit. Don't go to the bank and withdraw the cash. The cash you collect during the shift as an owner of the brewery or as a manager should also be deposited in the bank, because if not, it's going to get recorded. It's going to go to bands. It's going to go to this. It's going to go to that. It's never going to make it to your bank account. So the actual cash that you collect, that's not, not tips that, they put in a tip jar. Don't tip your employees out using the cash you collect from the shift. Make sure that goes to the bank. Go on weekly payroll, because payroll is very, very cheap. And then your employees will learn how to budget, especially your front of house. If you're getting paid every single Friday, you're going to be okay. So making that transition. I had to make that transition twice this year for clients that have been around for 8 years. They're like, this will never work. This will never work. Now we're on payroll in 15 minutes, and it's awesome. And all of a sudden they're making deposits for that cash that they collected over the weekend. So legit, just managing your actual cash. And if you have to pay somebody in cash, that's fine. But we need to record it.
Yeah.
Much smaller than what Dan and Jen are talking about. But if you're, I don't know how big of a brewery or how big of a business you're running, start there, weekly payroll, put everything you can through the actual payroll. So you know that, hey, payroll is going to hit on Friday. I'm going to have the funds for that.
100%. Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, I think we're at time here. I thank my collaborators, Dan Herron, Jen Busch, Pat McDonald. Fantastic job. This turned into, I think, much more than just a financial talk. It really talked operations, efficiency, culture, and really everything there drives the financial success. So again, everybody here, I appreciate you so much. I appreciate everybody that tuned in. CBP Panel Fest 2024. It's a great time. Signing off, TJ O'Neill with Whipley CPAs and Advisors. Thank you, Andrew, for the opportunity, and I hope to see all of you very, very soon at your local CBP event, hopefully one of the Connects events coming up. So cheers, everybody. I'll drink a beer with you guys soon.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
All right. Take care, everyone. Bye now.
Take care.